You're about to see a revolutionary film. For the first time ever, a film dares to go far beyond the moral arguments which have been used against animal experimentation for over 100 years. This film exposes not only the terrifying tortures which disguised as science are inflicted upon millions of animals, but also the incalculable damage to human health that such a scientific fraud is responsible for. Some of the facts presented here will directly contradict what you have been told and taught for years, even what you firmly believe in. This is because the conditioning we all have been subjected to, some may call it brainwashing, began shortly after we were born. I am only asking you that you examine the evidence presented here using your logic and common sense. Try to put aside any preconceived notions that you might have on the subject. A word of caution. Some of the scenes may be hard to watch. You can always close your eyes for a few seconds while still listening to the narration, since this will probably be the most important film on the subject that you will ever see. It is very important that you watch it in its entirety. In closing, I would like to say that this film signals the birth of a brand new anti-vivisectionist movement in the United States. This new movement, based upon the evidence collected by Swiss author and medical historian Hans Rusch, will succeed in abolishing animal experimentation, not only on self-evident moral grounds, but on medical and scientific grounds. This massive body of evidence is contained in his breakthrough books, Slaughter of the Innocent and Naked Empress. All of us, including future generations, are in his debt.
Every single year, some 100 million animals of all kinds are killed in the U.S. alone in biomedical research and testing. These animals are used by universities, hospitals, pharmaceutical and cosmetic companies, industrial complexes of all kinds, and by NASA and the military. The number of animals used by the military is unknown and thus is not included in the 100 million figure. The military tests all weapons, including atomic bombs, on live animals. Animals are also used as surrogates for man in warlike situations. The evidence gathered in this film will prove that animal research is not only a self-evident crime against animals, but also a crime against humanity. Some well-meaning people still believe that animal research can be humane. The fact is that humane animal research is a contradiction in terms simply because the very aim of animal research is to cause distress and pain by trying to recreate disease and trauma. The goal is never to cure, since the animals are always healthy before the experiments. How can anyone burn, mutilate, or shock the pain centers of the brain with electricity in a humane manner? Anesthetics and pain-relieving drugs are not required by law, and thus are not given to an estimated 85% of the animals used. One reason for this can be found in the fear on the part of the researcher that the anesthetic might interfere with the experiment. In many instances, anesthetics are replaced with restraining devices or drugs which allow the animals to feel pain, but which paralyze their capacity to move or cry out. Have you ever wondered why high school students are forced to dissect animals? Since the role of a high school is not to turn out zoologists or veterinarians, the existence of dissection is impossible to justify from either the educational or scientific points of view. The real reason is, of course, that the seed of desensitization has to be planted early.
I'm a student at a high school. I'm in the 10th grade, and I'd like to give you an example of some of the stuff that goes on. In one of our classes, cellular biology, which you don't have to be a brain to get into, they just recently carried on one experiment with frogs. The object of the experiment was to prove that their digestive tract still works after they are brain dead. So what the teacher did was she took a needle and she punctured the frog's head several times to mash up its brains while it was alive. It had not been killed yet. And then they opened up the abdomen of the frog to observe it still digesting the food. You know, first of all, you know, it's quite obvious that this type of thing is just completely ludicrous. And furthermore, who cares? Who cares?
Dissection is safely shrouded from criticism behind such sacrosanct names as science, biology, life sciences, and lab skills. Standard dissection exercises involve the cutting up of frogs, cats, piglets, mice, and pigeons. Students are also encouraged to participate in science fairs, where they compete against each other for prizes. Some of the projects entered at these fairs are full-fledged vivisectionist experiments involving live dogs, cats, and monkeys. These experiments are conducted by students in their teens. Can anyone seriously maintain that dissecting frogs and mice can teach our children about the human body and how it works? Dissection is an integral part of the pseudo-scientific mentality which controls our educational system at all levels, making the existence and growth of vivisection possible.
25 years ago, when I was doing my undergraduate work, I was involved in fulfilling all the university requirements to be a physiotherapist. I had to do a lot of dissection, which I did. I dissected cats, I dissected frogs, and so forth, earthworms, and I was good at it. The dissection went very well. Unfortunately, I forgot the fact that it was a class in human anatomy, not cat anatomy, and when I came to take the test, I did a miserable job. I failed the first examination. So then it became apparent that I should spend more time on human anatomy and less on dissecting the cat, which I did. And people today would ask me, what part did dissecting cats and frogs play in my success as an anatomist and a physiologist in that particular class? I would have to say absolutely nothing. Just nothing.
Most people still believe that only rats and mice are used in research. The fact is that hundreds of thousands of dogs and cats are used in the U.S. each year, along with thousands of monkeys and apes, farm animals, rabbits, and turtles. The numbers of frogs, birds, and mice run into the millions. Where do these animals come from? Most people are totally unaware of the fact that most of the dogs and cats used in research come from our very own public pounds and animal shelters. Incredibly, these tax-supported facilities not only release people's pets to laboratories, but they also subsidize research by selling them at extremely low prices. If you ever lose your pet, make sure that you check all pounds in your area daily so you can claim your dog or cat immediately and thus prevent the pound from selling your pet to a lab. This shameful practice, known as pound seizure, is perfectly legal in most states in the U.S. Only a handful of states has been able to make it illegal through the passage of hard-fought legislation. In those states, the shelters have reverted to their intended function, a haven for lost and abandoned animals. Unfortunately, in most states, shelters remain inexhaustible sources of cheap laboratory animals. Even some zoos are involved. In 1982, the Detroit Zoo released at least 21 crab-eating macaque monkeys to Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, to be used in terminal experiments. Many other zoos routinely advertise in the Primate Supply Information Clearinghouse, a publication which caters to animal research facilities. In the June 3, 1985 issue, the Los Angeles Zoo advertised 21 primates for sale. Other zoos which have advertised animals for sale are San Diego, Fort Worth, Dallas, Utica, Santa Barbara, Louisiana Purchase, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Norfolk, Oakland, Colorado Springs, Denver, San Antonio, Bronx, Toledo, Seattle, and many more. But this is not all. In Los Angeles, the University of Southern California has been trying to get approval from the city of Los Angeles to build a facility at the Los Angeles Zoo, which would house research primates. In other words, the university would be conducting animal research at the zoo as well. The second source is the purpose-bred animal. More than 1,600 animal breeders in the U.S. offer all kinds of animals, from mice and rats to primates. These are animals who are bred just to be used as laboratory tools. In many instances, animals are bred with built-in diseases and offered to customers with surgical modifications. This simply means that some animals have undergone as many as 17 operations by the time they are sold to a research facility. This is simply a huge business. The largest and best known is the multinational Charles River Breeding Laboratories Incorporated of Wilmington, Massachusetts, one of the fastest growing stocks over the past few years. The company's 1984 net sales were over $40 million. Recently, Charles River was acquired by Bausch & Lomb Company of Rochester, New York, best known for its line of contact lenses. For just $135 million, Bausch & Lomb purchased a biological assembly line which produces more than 22 million animals a year in plants in 7 nations. The new anti-vivisectionist movement is not against research. It is against animal research. But its opposition is not only on self-evident moral grounds, but on medical and scientific grounds. Animal research is not science, and therefore its practice constitutes scientific fraud. The fraud of animal research can be easily demonstrated with 2 clear facts. Number 1, the research animals are not human beings. And number 2, the animals are always healthy before the experiments. Since animals are not human beings, their problems are obviously different from ours. Their bodies are different, they suffer from different diseases, and their reactions to drugs are also different. Besides, the fact that the animal is healthy before the experiment means that disease and/or trauma has to be given by violent and artificial means, which can never be the same as the disease which develops spontaneously in a human being. Clearly, the results obtained from artificially diseased animals can never be extrapolated to human beings. Therefore, it is not a question of whether or to what degree animal research works. The point is that animal research cannot work simply because the premise on which it is based is false.
He is the author of Slaughter of the Innocent, the author of Naked Empress. He has come all the way from Switzerland to be here for our rally today. Hans Rüsch is an international giant in our movement, and I want you to welcome Mr. Hans Rüsch.
The main point is that we must attack vivisection on medical grounds and forget the ethical grounds. Why? You know that the ethical considerations, like when you speak of the sanctity of life, or of animals have rights, this is perfectly right. But these slogans will always be outshouted by the sleazy slogans of our adversaries who say babies or dogs. Babies or dogs. And this slogan has finally conditioned the medical thinking of our whole nations, of yours and mine.
Well, the reason why I'm against animal research is because it doesn't work. It has no scientific value. One cannot extrapolate the results of animal research to human beings, and every good scientist knows that. Doctors themselves will admit that animal experimentation is no good. For example, if you say to the doctors, well, these experiments in animals show that this drug is dangerous. It can cause cancer. It can cause all kinds of side effects. The doctors will say, oh, that's just animal experimentation. You can't extrapolate that to human beings. They themselves admit that it's no good. As far as I'm concerned, since animal experiments have no validity, and since they lead to quackery inside of medicine, I have to be opposed to quackery, and therefore I have to be opposed to animal experiments as a scientist, regardless of what my moral feelings are about animals.
It is estimated that in the U.S. alone, some 20 million animals are used every year just to test drugs, including analgesics, cosmetics, household products of all kinds, and substances used in industry and agriculture, such as pesticides. The LD50, or lethal dose 50% we are seeing here, is an acute toxicity test in which a number of animals are given different amounts of a substance to determine what dose will kill 50% of them over a predetermined period of time. The test is principally used to give a rough indication of the toxicity of a substance or new drug when this is unknown. The force feeding of huge quantities of substances, which can include bleach, oven cleaners, and toothpaste, may cause the animal's stomach to rupture or may kill the animal through the physical damage to a system. This has nothing to do with the actual toxicity of the substance. It shouldn't be difficult for any sane person watching this pathetic scene to understand that this test is not only an intolerable atrocity, a leftover from the darkest of ages, but also a scientific fraud, since the information cannot be extrapolated to other animals, let alone to man. Since the LD50 is not only worthless, but dangerously misleading, the inescapable conclusion is that every time you take a drug, you are the real guinea pig. The use of the rabbit's eye to test not only cosmetics, but detergents, pesticides, and any substances which might be hazardous to human eyes is routine. This is known as the Drey's test, and it has been used since 1945. The rabbit's cornea is particularly sensitive. It is only 0.36 millimeters thick, compared to 0.51 millimeters for man. Furthermore, the rabbit's eye does not have effective tear glands, which prevents the eye from dissolving the irritating substance. Of course, the rabbits are in restraint during the 1 to 3 days they are undergoing this suffering, which can lead to the slow and total destruction of the eye. In 1974, the Northern District Court of Ohio ruled that the Food and Drug Administration had failed to show that the results of tests on rabbits' eyes can be extrapolated to humans. Rabbits are also used in acute skin tests. It is clear that both the LD50 and the Drey's test must be abolished, not only because of the savagery they represent, but also because far from affording any protection to humans, they cause all kinds of damages due to their utter unreliability. It is common knowledge in industry circles that these tests are conducted for legal reasons and not for scientific reasons, so manufacturers can claim to have adhered to safety tests when confronted with lawsuits. It is particularly offensive that products such as cosmetics, which are meant to beautify, could hide such disturbing ugliness under such a glamorous facade. Concerned women should stop buying cosmetics tested on animals and seek out the small but increasing number of companies which make fine cosmetics not tested on animals. Each year, thousands of animals are forced to chain smoke cigarettes to prove that tobacco is harmful, or that it is not, depending on who foots the bill. Animals are also forced to drink alcohol and to become drug addicts. Gasoline and other automotive products are also tested on live animals. Believe it or not, this is not a veterinary school. These students practicing surgery on animals may operate on you one day.
You must really say, one must be mad to say that a surgeon has to exercise on dog before he can operate. None of you would go to a veterinarian if you needed your appendix taken out or your gallbladder. You know that.
The training in physiology and pharmacology laboratories, as far as vivisection is concerned, has a major value for the medical students. By getting the students used to the shedding of innocent animal blood, they can later become tolerant of the shedding of innocent human blood.
Animals used in experiments are, among other things, burned, poisoned, starved, irradiated, surgically mutilated, stressed, kept in solitary, deprived of sleep, inoculated with deadly diseases, frozen, driven insane, and kept in restraining devices for long periods of time.
Why do doctors believe in animal experimentation as firmly as they do? And my answer is that that has something to do with their education. Because the education of a physician does not train him in scientific medicine, it trains him in religious medicine. So that in the second and third year of medical school, and sometimes even in the first year, when the doctor enters, when the medical student enters the pharmacology laboratory or the physiology laboratory, he learns how to do vivisection. He carries out experiments on animals which he knows and his professors know are worthless because they are told in advance how the experiment is supposed to turn out. If it doesn't turn out the way it's supposed to, they go back and they do the experiment over again using another dog. Now, what kind of language do the doctors use and do the medical students use in those animal laboratories? At the end of the experiment, they turn to a religious word. When it's time to conclude the experiment, they don't say, we're going to kill the animal. They don't say, we're going to dispose of the animal. They say, we are going to sacrifice the animal. And my question is, to whom are they making that sacrifice? And you take my own religion. We Jews gave up animal sacrifices thousands of years ago. But the religion of modern medicine is still deeply into animal sacrifices.
This is Britches, a tiny infant monkey who was separated from his mother at birth. His eyes were sewn shut and fitted with a grotesque sonar device in order to make him see as a bat. Here, you can see him clinging to his surrogate mother.
That is incorrect. The correct spelling of surgeon is S-U-R-G-E-O-N, surgeon. Now spell Pierce. 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 Pierce.
The skin of this conscious pig is going to be burned down to the muscle. This so-called experiment took place at the U.S. Army Burn Research Unit at Brooke Army Hospital at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas.
That is incorrect. The correct spelling of Pierce is P-I-E-R-C-E. Pierce. Now spell Putin. 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 Butcher. 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 Try again. Butcher.
Does this look like science to you? The constant talk about alternatives or even replacements to animal experiments is dangerous and misleading because it implies that animal experiments are useful and therefore worth replacing. Animal experiments are not science and must be abolished. The only replacement is real science, which means that the truly scientific experiments which will replace animal experiments will be totally different conceptually, and therefore they cannot be even compared to the phony animal experiments, examples of which you have just witnessed. There are only two ways to deal with health problems. We either stop disease from happening through prevention, or, if disease has already occurred, we must engage in clinical studies, meaning that you have to study the people who spontaneously came down with the disease, not only to learn about it, but also, of course, to cure them. We already know that diet and environment are responsible for practically all diseases, and yet we do next to nothing to prevent them. As a society, we refuse to come to grips with the scientific fact that the human animal is a vegetarian animal. Animal experimentation is purported to save human lives. The killing and eating of 6 billion farm animals a year in the U.S. alone is purported to make us strong and healthy. The ironic fact is that animal experimentation and eating animals are the two main causes of human suffering and death. Experimentation, or the artificial recreation of disease in the lab, is the opposite of both prevention and clinical studies. And since prevention is accepted by everyone as being the ideal situation, its opposite is clearly a disastrous path to follow. But then, there is little money to be made from prevention. If you have trouble understanding how such inconceivable savagery and utter uselessness can still be going on today, you should consider the staggering amounts of money which revolve around this huge business called vivisection or animal research. 1. Research grants. The National Institutes of Health, the National Institute of Mental Health, the National Science Foundation, and other institutions award grants to thousands of researchers throughout the country and the world. It is estimated that some 35 billion of our tax dollars are spent each year on research.
And did you know that 75% of the researchers who ask for a federal grant to do experiments on animals receive it? Now just think about that. 4 researchers ask for a grant. 4. 1 is turned down. 3 of them receive it. Why? How is that possible, the peer review system? When you want money, if you're a researcher and you want money from the federal government to do an experiment on living animals, you write up a proposal, you submit it to a committee composed of whom? Of other researchers. And they're notorious for scratching each other's backs. You approve mine, I'll approve yours. We approve his, he'll approve ours. So 75% of them are approved. Now that's bad. That's bad. But it gets worse. 95% of them are renewed. Once you get a federal grant, if you are a researcher, you're set for life. He goes on what is called research welfare. And we support him and pay him. It has to stop, doesn't it?
2. Private industry. Closely connected to animal research are thousands of businesses, animal breeders and suppliers, the manufacturers of accessories to the immense carnage such as feed, cages, restraining and stereotaxic devices, and the vast arsenal of surgical and torture instruments. 3. The politicians who keep pocketing large sums from the vivisection lobbies, bent on keeping the profitable system alive and growing. 4. The pharmaceutical companies, of course, which require scapegoats for the poisons they manage to palm off on a gullible world population as indispensable for health, whereas they are indispensable only for their own profit. 5. People and institutions involved in fundraising activities for research. One example of such activities can be seen in the many telethons organized to raise money towards the cure of the many diseases which conveniently remain uncured. Organizers of such telethons make sure not to ever mention the fact that substantial amounts of the monies raised finance animal research. 6. Sickness care. Intimately related to the constant recreation of disease on which animal research is based, we find the biggest industry of them all, healthcare, which should be more accurately called sickness care. Sickness care costs U.S. taxpayers more than $1 billion a day, and it's increasing at the rate of $1,000 per second. Both Medicaid and Medicare are bankrupt, and the ever-increasing sickness care costs have already broken the financial back of the country. As important as the almighty dollar is, it cannot by itself explain the existence and growth of vivisection. 2 more elements are essential to its survival: secrecy and deception. What are the vivisectors afraid of? If animal research is such a noble endeavor, why is it that it has to be hidden away, behind fences, locked doors, and in sub-basements? Animal research is conducted away from public scrutiny simply because the researchers know full well that once the public is informed, it will no longer be tolerated. But this seemingly impenetrable wall of secrecy has been cracked, mainly due to the courageous actions of the Animal Liberation Front, which has brought to light not only the unspeakable savagery, but also the scientific fraud that animal research really is. On Sunday, December 9th, 1984, members of the ALF entered a City of Hope research facility in Duarte, California, a Los Angeles suburb. They freed 126 research animals. This footage was taken by the ALF itself. At City of Hope, beagles are used in cancer research. Here you can see a dog that has been given cancerous tumors. His back is full of them. Of 102 dogs used in a set of cancer experiments from 1975 through 1981, City of Hope records the deaths of more than half of them, 54 to be exact, before the risk of cancer. That is to say, before reaching the point of the experiment. All of this simply means, of course, that most of the animals die before the so-called experiments are even finished. But as long as the grant money keeps rolling in year after year, City of Hope will continue using fresh supplies of animals to start this scientific charade all over again and again and again. Can any sane person believe that artificially and violently induced tumors in a beagle can compare to tumors that develop spontaneously in a human being? This dog, also rescued by the ALF, had given birth to 17 puppies. They all died of exposure and starvation on a wet and filthy cement slab. The mother, unable to feed them, had given up, since she knew they didn't have a chance. She had been subjected to radiation, and as a result, she did not have any milk. Many animals were found frozen in plastic bags with their legs taped together. Even a human leg was found in a plastic bag. For what purpose? Your guess is as good as ours. What you are about to see now are excerpts from the videotapes that the Animal Liberation Front removed from the Head Injury Research Center at the University of Pennsylvania on Memorial Day 1984. These are the tapes that the researchers themselves took of their own experiments and constitute the most devastating piece of evidence yet. About to be injured, the baboon is strapped down to the operating table. His ankles and wrists are bound with canvas straps. His head is cemented into a metal helmet and will be thrust at a 60-degree angle at a force of up to 1,000 Gs. The principal investigator is Thomas A. Gennarelli. This program receives about $1 million annually. In the last 15 years, this program has spent some $12 million of our tax dollars. The stated purpose of these so-called experiments is to simulate auto crash, football, boxing, and other injuries. As you can see, the baboons struggle and grasp at their restraints, showing clearly that they are partially and sometimes fully conscious and aware. This footage affords you the unique opportunity to see and hear the researchers as they conduct their research. It also reveals not only the incredible degree of savagery and fraud involved, but also the total state of dehumanization reached by these individuals.
He's wide awake, blinking his eye.
According to Dr. J. Glass, a Pittsburgh neurophysiologist, quote, "The baboon's elongated nose and non-spherical skull in no way approximates the human head," end quote.
I mean, I just know what the literature shows, and what I know what our results were, and I challenge anybody to show that any of that has advanced the cause of the treatment of human head injury one iota. The bulk of the knowledge that now exists and upon which the treatment of human head injury is predicated is that which has been derived from human head injury in the past, whether in the civilian sector or in the military. And in many ways, the results which were obtained with animals have been misleading, because in the case of quadrupeds, the physiological mechanisms are different, so that the kinds of data obtained for different systems, circulatory, the blood pressure and so forth, respiratory, cardiac, are different from those results which occur in natural human head injuries.
Down for a second lateral bank. That's him waving. As you can see, the monkey's awake, moving all extremities. That's his trainer who taught him how to do those tricks. The animal is mounted in a helmet. He's monitored for ICP, EKG, EEG, blood pressure, etc. The animal is to be thrust in a lateral position to become a chronic animal for long-term studies. Cheerleading over in the corner we have B10. B10 wishes his counterpart well. As you can see, B10 is alive. B10 is watching and hoping for a good result. In our contract, it says no more than 3 calls. Push. It's a boy.
She doesn't look the least bit
Yeah, there she goes. There she goes. She's on TV.
Oh my God.
Holding her monkey.
Look, yeah!
Oh, go.
It's like the cat. Kitty, kitty, look at the cat commercial.
Say over here, say cheese.
Looks like she's gonna fall over.
Yeah.
You better hope the anti-vivisection people don't get a hold of this film.
The hell?
The anti-vivisection people, they got a nice shot of you.
Why does she
They got Larry's name
for
in the picture.
And Karen.
Right.
So far you got
As the punk look.
the punk look, is that what you said? Oh, not again.
She says, "You're gonna rescue me from this, aren't you? Aren't you? She says, "You're gonna rescue me from this, aren't you?"
Does this look like science to you? Vivisection would have been abolished long ago if it were championed only by the vivisectors, who themselves provide the evidence which demonstrates the disastrous harmfulness of today's medicine, conditioned by misleading animal experimentation. The real obstacle to abolition is the smokescreen produced by the mass media, which influence public opinion, governments, and legislators by constantly advertising medical research as an intelligent and humanitarian enterprise, useful and necessary. The media also act as cheerleaders for the vivisection community, falsely presenting them as altruistic demigods who work miracles in our behalf. The majority of television and printed news media purposely misquote anti-vivisectionists, distort their message, depict them as anti-human, and refuse to air or publish the most eloquent medical and scientific arguments against vivisection. The reason for this blatant suppression and distortion of the facts is simple. The survival of the media depends almost exclusively on the income derived from advertising. If you watch TV, listen to the radio, or read newspapers and magazines, you already know that an overwhelming number of advertisements pitch drugs, the pharmaceutical empire, household products of all kinds, the chemical empire, cosmetics, the cosmetics empire, and tobacco, the tobacco empire. You should also keep in mind that the food and beverage industries are also heavily involved with the chemical empire, due to the incorporation of dyes and additives into practically all foods and beverages. And of course, the pharmaceutical empire sells millions of dollars worth of drugs, which are fed to the farm animals people eventually eat. We already know that all the products just mentioned are tested on animals. But not only testing in massive scale is involved here. Many of these powerful companies support or they are themselves involved in animal experimentation. What all of this means is, of course, that the most powerful corporations in America don't want you to know the facts about animal research and testing, even if your life depended on it. And of course, it does. Anti-vivisectionists are often accused of being emotional, and yet it is the research community and its allies who, unable to prove the scientific value of vivisection, have to resort to patently emotional slogans like the classic, "What shall it be, your dog or your baby?" Fortunately, growing numbers of people are beginning to realize that the research animals are not the only victims. Millions of human beings suffer the predictable consequences of a fraudulent research which is responsible for the most systematic, massive, and widespread damage to human health ever known. Consequently, most diseases, far from being cured, are on the increase, claiming more lives every year. Heart disease kills at least 3,000 Americans every single day. It is the #1 killer in the country. It is estimated that cardiovascular disease alone cost the nation $72.1 billion in 1985 in physician and nursing services, hospital bills, medication, and loss of productivity. We already know that at least 95% of all heart disease is directly linked to diet, with some 5% due to genetic causes. And yet the research community is wasting its time and billions of our dollars going the opposite route. Instead of curing heart disease through prevention, they are trying to convince this nation that spare hearts, whether animal or artificial, is the way of the future. Even if these hearts worked in humans, which they don't, it would be totally impossible from both the practical and economic points of view to transplant thousands of hearts every single day. Cancer is the #2 killer in the U.S. It eventually strikes 1 out of every 3 Americans and kills almost 450,000 of them annually. Consequently, most Americans have a casualty in their own home. We already know that an overwhelming number of cancers are caused by diet, toxic waste, pollution of the air and water. And yet we fight cancer with chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, which, far from curing the patient, are responsible for more irreversible damages. Diabetes is the #3 killer of Americans. More people per 100,000 are dying of diabetes today than in 1900, 22 years before the discovery of insulin.
People on the other side will often give you emotional arguments in favor of animal research. They will say, oh, if it weren't for animal research, we wouldn't have insulin. And what would happen to all the diabetics? But they don't give you the darker side of the insulin question. They don't tell people that according to physicians themselves today, the most eminent leaders in the field of diabetes, 90% of all diabetics who are on insulin should not be on insulin. They won't tell you of the evidence that insulin, when given to a diabetic over a period of years, can be responsible for the late complications of diabetes, diabetic retinopathy, blindness, and diabetic gangrene. They don't tell you the dangers of insulin. They don't tell you that just like with other drugs, penicillin, cortisone, insulin today is so widely misused that it's quite possible that more people have been killed by insulin over the years than have been saved.
Another area where human beings are victims of the vivisectionist mentality is that of unnecessary surgeries. There are now some 500 coronary bypass operations performed every day in the United States. It is the most common form of major surgery. Yet in 80% of these cases, the surgery is ineffective, unnecessary, and even counterproductive. At least 20% of all childbirths are now done by cesarean section. Yet studies show that over 75% of these are unnecessary and endanger the health of the mother and baby. In the United States, childbirth has become a medical procedure, a disease. According to a recent front-page story in the New York Times, American surgeons are performing an estimated 2.4 million unnecessary operations every year, in which 11,900 patients die as a result of complications. It is estimated that each year 260,000 women undergo needless hysterectomies, and some 500,000 children are subjected to unwarranted tonsillectomies. Birth defects in the U.S. have increased more than 350% in the last 25 years. In the late 1950s, 70,000 American babies were born with birth defects every year. In the 80s, This toll has reached 250,000 a year, according to the March of Dimes, an organization whose research involves interfering with the pregnancy of healthy animals in order to recreate birth defects. The reasons for this whopping increase are well known: toxic waste, pollution, tobacco, alcohol, and drugs. But a good percentage of these birth defects are directly linked to the pharmaceutical drugs intended for pregnant women. Many of you will remember the disaster caused by thalidomide in the 60s. 10,000 babies were born with grotesque defects. Meet Kevin DeLennon. He was a human guinea pig. He is a thalidomide baby.
Thalidomide does not cause malformations in mice, but causes it in human beings. And let me tell you that mice are up to 1,000 times less sensitive to thalidomide than human beings. Now, it is not just a matter of dosage, it is a matter that the various species do react in a different way.
But the thalidomide warning went unheeded, and as a result, the list of harmful drugs has been growing year after year. Among them, DES, Oriflex, Bendectin, Zomax, Accutane, and many more. It is estimated that some 15,000 new mixtures and dosages hit the market each year, while some 12,000 are pulled off the shelves. According to the Food and Drug Administration, 1.5 million Americans had to be hospitalized in 1978 as a consequence of taking drugs which were supposed to cure them of something or other. And some 30% of all hospitalized people get further damaged by the therapy that is imposed on them. The number of people killed in the U.S. by the intake of drugs has been estimated at some 140,000 each year. We already saw that the obsessive reliance upon misleading animal tests, such as the LD50, is responsible for this sad state of affairs. Animals do react differently to drugs. Penicillin kills guinea pigs, but the same guinea pigs can safely eat strychnine, one of the deadliest poisons for humans, but not for monkeys. A dose of belladonna that would kill a man is harmless for rabbits and goats. Digitalis, the main remedy for cardiac patients, dangerously raises the blood pressure in dogs. Chloroform, a valuable anesthetic for humans, is toxic to dogs. On the other hand, a dose of opium that would kill a man is harmless to dogs and chickens. Sheep can swallow enormous quantities of arsenic, once the murderer's favorite poison, and aspirin can kill cats. There are enough such instances to fill a book. Why then does the pharmaceutical industry rely on such an insane method? The answer is simple. If a truly reliable test were used, such as in vitro testing, it would immediately become clear that 99.9% of all drugs developed are at best worthless and at worst deadly to human beings. This, of course, would spell disaster for the pharmaceutical empire. Therefore, unreliable and inconclusive tests are essential to its survival, especially in the face of the ever-increasing number of lawsuits, since the animal tests are conducted for legal reasons and not for scientific reasons, in order to protect the astronomical profits derived from the sale of the 205,000 medical preparations marketed worldwide since 1961. But not only are all drugs safety tested on animals, but vaccines as well. Consequently, vaccines have caused and are causing terrible damages. These children are victims of DPT and measles vaccines. This is what Wendy Scholl, mother of one of these vaccine-damaged children, has to say.
As parents, we felt by vaccinating our healthy, normal babies against childhood diseases, we were only ensuring a safer childhood. Instead, retardation, multiple handicaps, and even death in some cases was to be their fate.
There has never been a single vaccine in this country that has ever been submitted to the controlled scientific study. They never took a group of 100 people who were candidates for a vaccine, gave 50 of them the vaccine, left the other 50 alone, and measured the outcomes. And since that has never been done, that means that if you want to be kind, you will call vaccines an unproven remedy. If you want to be accurate, you'll call the people who give the vaccines quacks.
Despite the fact that we spend over $355 billion a year on health care, the U.S. still has major health problems. The U.S. ranks 15th in the world in infant mortality. The U.S. ranks 16th in the world in female life expectancy. The U.S. ranks 35th in the world in male life expectancy. But it is not only the death statistics we should be concerned with. How about the living dead? Thousands upon thousands of Americans are literally warehoused in hospitals and nursing homes, victims of crippling diseases, both physical and mental. Most of these patients are controlled by drugs, sterilization, electroshock therapy, and in some cases by frontal lobotomies. Jose Delgado, the vivisector who spent years at Yale University electroshocking monkeys in brain areas known to produce intense pain, said candidly that he would like to see, quote, human society psycho-civilized through brain stimulation and other influencing techniques, end quote. We also know that Robert White, the monkey head transplanter from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, wants to try his technique on human beings. It wouldn't be far-fetched to suspect that unfortunate social outcasts warehoused in mental institutions may have already been subjected to head transplantation operations. These are a few examples of diseases that remain uncured despite decades of research on animals and billions of dollars. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, arthritis, leukemia, muscular dystrophy, blindness, cerebral palsy, sickle cell disease, epilepsy, Alzheimer's disease, and practically all mental disorders, with new diseases being added to the long list, like herpes and the latest tragedy, AIDS.
Since no one researcher can ever state that a result he has obtained on an animal is absolutely, surely able to be extrapolated to a human being, then it follows that he has to start experimenting again on people. And that is what happens. They don't have to ask us, do you want us to experiment on people? They are experimenting on people. In fact, we wish them to stop experimenting on people. We want them to stop experimenting on animals because it's only misleading what animals tell us. And then we want them to stop experimenting on people, which they are doing constantly all the time.
Finally, the connection between animal research and human damage has been made, and as a result, a new movement seeking the total abolition of vivisection on medical and scientific grounds has been born. But the new anti-vivisectionist movement faces a formidable challenge. Not only does it have to fight the extremely powerful research community and its allies, but also a much less obvious enemy, the many animal organizations which either don't understand what vivisection is all about, or worse yet, have been infiltrated. Infiltrated societies have a vested interest in keeping vivisection alive and strong while pretending that they are fighting it. In order to accomplish this, many thousands of people ready to do something to stop vivisection are attracted as members and then fed misinformation or outright lies which render them ineffectual and thus harmless. At the same time, these well-meaning members support these organizations in style by donating millions of dollars to their constant request for funds. These organizations can be easily recognized. They either push for the regulation or reform of animal experimentation. They object to the nature and/or repetition of some experiments, or they advocate eventual abolition on moral and ethical grounds only. According to a recent report compiled by Mobilization for Animals, the 15 wealthiest animal organizations in the U.S. are sitting on top of more than $140 million. Incredibly, several of these organizations have investments in companies which do toxicology testing and/or experiments on animals. Under the leadership of these organizations, animal experimentation has grown as fast as their bank accounts. The freezing of such enormous resources, coupled with the stubborn refusal to confront vivisectors with the devastating weapon of scientific fraud, constitute crimes which can only be compared to the crimes committed by the vivisectors themselves. The attack against vivisection must concentrate on scientific and medical arguments and practically ignore the moral considerations. The reason for this is simple. The researchers justify their use of animals on a scientific premise. They claim that animal research saves human lives. Therefore, attacking vivisection on moral grounds does not challenge in any way the foundation on which animal research rests, and it actually ensures its survival by reinforcing the perception that this is merely a conflict between scientific progress and animal welfare. But a choice between human and animal life has to be made. How can we effectively fight with philosophical concepts such as animal rights, the sanctity of life, justice, morality, religion, speciesism, as long as most people believe that animal research cures sick babies? Besides, moral arguments have not worked for the last 100 years. Moral considerations failed to stop animal research in its infancy, when only a handful of animals were being used, and when the monies involved were very modest. Clearly, moral considerations will not stop the huge industry that animal research is today. Making sure that the public learns the scientific facts is the first step towards abolition. That's why the new anti-vivisectionist must be informed in order to be effective. Reading Hans Rusch's books, Slaughter of the Innocent and Naked Empress, is essential. The new movement is based on the information they contain.
Well, I was honored to write the preface to that book because that book, I think, is, if you'll pardon the religious metaphor, the name of the book is Slaughter of the Innocent. Slaughter of the Innocent is going to be, if it is not already, the Bible of the animal movement. I advise everybody to read it.
A new element in the fight has been the birth of the Animal Liberation Front. This incredible footage taken by the ALF itself shows the liberation of breeches from the University of California at Riverside on April 20th, 1985. this raid, the largest to date anywhere, 1,016 animals were freed. Without harming anyone, the ALF has not only provided conclusive evidence on film of the incredible quackery going on in the name of science, but has also warned the research community that the new breed of anti-vivisectionists are willing to take risks to bring about the abolition of vivisection.
The battle horse of modern medicine, animal experimentation, is dead. It has been dead for a long time, but the jokers in charge of research pretend they don't know it. It is time that all this nonsense ceased. It is time to bury the corpse, lest the stench poison us all. In sum, it is time to ask for the abolition of vivisection now and not in 200 years.
Indeed, total abolition will come simply because there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has been long overdue. This is Britches today. He's totally recovered. His eyes were unstitched, and he can see well now. He's happy now in his new home somewhere in America.
Surgeon. 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 Surgeon.
You can stop vivisection. Information will be provided immediately after the credits. Please stand by.
The sooner the information contained in this film reaches the public, the faster abolition will come. This massive task has to be undertaken by regular citizens like you and me. Sweeping laws will only be passed when overwhelming numbers of people force politicians to do so. Therefore, accurate information is the key. I have a few areas where you can start working now.
Number 1, public presentations. Show this film to as many people as possible. Organize showings in your own home, neighbors' homes, local clubs, churches, high schools, colleges, or any other place where you can get a group of people together. 2, students. Students hold the key to the solution. First of all, show this film in your classroom. Form an anti-vivisectionist group in your school and make this film available to other classes. Get the support of your parents, teachers, and classmates. Boycott science classes until the school agrees to do away with dissection, whether it involves live or dead animals. If necessary, go to the principal and/or to the Board of Education. Call the media. Picket the school. If you are in college, first of all, obtain evidence on film. Make the film available to the local media and all students. Form an anti-vivisectionist group on campus. Refuse to engage in vivisection and boycott classes. Get the support of as many students and professors as possible and organize demonstrations on campus. Stress the uselessness and counterproductiveness of animal experimentation. Call the media. It is clear that changes must come from within high schools and colleges. You can start it all in your school. You can count on our support. 3, pound seizure. Start a movement in your community to stop the selling of animals from the local pounds and animal shelters to labs. First of all, investigate which pounds sell animals to which facilities and expose the situation to the public. Put pressure on local officials and politicians to stop the practice. Picket the pounds and labs involved. Picket City Hall. Always call the media. Number 4, zoos. Investigate the local zoo. As you saw earlier, many zoos make animals available to research and/or breed animals for research purposes. If this is the case, expose the situation and picket the zoo. Pressure the local department responsible for running the zoo. Always call the media. 5, businesses. Expose companies which breed animals for research purposes. Expose companies which benefit from the huge business of animal research. An example of the former is Charles River Breeding Labs of Wilmington, Massachusetts, and its parent company, Bausch & Lomb of Rochester, New York. But there are many more. An example of the latter is Ralston Purina Company of St. Louis, Missouri, which makes millions selling food to pet owners and also makes millions by selling food for all kinds of lab animals. Boycott Bausch & Lomb products as well as Ralston Purina's dog and cat foods. Tell them why you won't buy their products. Organize demonstrations against these companies and call the media. Expose the cosmetic companies in your community and the practices of practically all industrial complexes. Number 6, telethons. Don't support telethons which raise money for research. Most of them do. Remember that research means animal research. Tell them why you won't support them. Do the same with mailings asking for donations. Expose the organizations involved. Inform the media. 7, damaged people. Try to organize in your community a group of people who have been victims of medical malpractice, damaged by drugs or vaccines. Make the connection with animal research to the local media and politicians. As you can see, what you can do comes down to 4 things: inform, expose, picket, and always call the media. This is why demonstrations are so very important. They are an excellent way to keep the issue in front of the public. Picket not only the institutions directly or indirectly engaged in vivisection, but also the homes of the vivisectors, which is extremely effective. Inform their neighbors, and of course, call the media in advance. Since it is unlikely that commercial TV will want to show this film, your best bet is to concentrate on PBS stations and/or cable stations. Supress will provide 3/4-inch copies to stations willing to show it. On commercial stations, you can try to get some airtime to promote hidden crimes and make people aware of its existence and availability on VHS tape.
You can also form a Supress chapter in your own community. You can call us for details. You can be part of this looming conceptual revolution which will change research and medicine forever. You can count on my personal support. Let me know how you're doing. Thank you for caring.